Jim, Tom, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here, John.
Thanks, John.
So today we're going to be talking about telemed and the fraud that's kind of coming with it, stuff that's happening right now, and the type of fraud that may be coming in the future. So we kind of wanted to get your expert opinions on what we need to look out for and how we can combat this. But first, give a little background and how long you guys have been in the fraud community, and what you're involved in right now. Jim, you first, or Tom, Jim, whoever wants to go first.
I'll be happy to go first. I'm Tom Fraysse, and I'm a partner with Knox Rixson LLP. We're based in Walnut Creek in Northern California, but most of our work is down in our LA office. So we're basically a California firm. We handle complex fraud cases for payers generally, and that includes insurance companies, union welfare trusts, any large payer that is victimized by fraud. Most of the work I do involves handling whistleblower, qui tam, False Claims Act cases. And in California, we are blessed with a fantastic statute, which is California Insurance Code 1871.7, which is a qui tam statute. And it allows insurance companies to go after fraudsters for penalties, assessments, attorney's fees, and all of the costs and expenses that are involved. And it's all predicated on proving by the civil standard of burden of proof that they engaged in some form of insurance fraud. And California has fortunately defined insurance fraud so broadly you could drive a truck through it. So it's a great practice to have. I started in fraud back shortly after getting sworn in 82, when carriers were flooded with personal injury mill type cases, medical and chiropractic. And I was fortunate enough during that period of time to try a lot of cases. It was an era in which trials were plentiful. And these would be mostly smaller one-off cases, but generally involving practitioners who were involved in suspected fraudulent claims. And again, largely mill-type operations. So we did lots of primitive analytics on certain practitioners, and in effect started reverse engineering what they were doing. So by the time you got to trial in that single case, you were in effect putting the practitioner on trial, which was a prelude to the larger, more complex cases where we started taking on healthcare fraud rings of one kind or another. And these have included teleradiology rings or scams, everything from sham medical offices to sham law offices. Believe it or not, we had a trial with two individuals, laypersons, who were basically opening phony law offices, utilizing the identification, the license and the name of a real licensed practitioner, lawyer in California. Fun case. It's almost like a 60 Minutes episode, and the juries tend to just find it so repugnant that they award the maximum penalties and assessments. So I've tried lots of cases. I've tried probably more of the complex qui tam cases using the California statute than anybody, which is a trial in and of itself, only because think about 12 jurors being the uninitiated when it comes to fraud concepts, and even educating judges and effectively enlisting them into the cause is a challenge in and of itself. So that's a little bit about what I do.
Jim?
Thank you, John. I'm Jim Quiggle, Head of Communications for the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud, which means I'm the Chief Fomenter of Buzz. The Coalition is a nonprofit alliance of insurance companies, consumer groups, government agencies, and other business partners. We are headquartered in Washington, D.C., and we were founded in 1993. We combat fraud across all lines of insurance. This means, auto, homeowners, life, workers' comp. And we do this by pushing for stronger state fraud laws. We are very, very involved in educating consumers, both to deter them and to empower them to protect and defend against scams. And we do a lot of research. So our studies are well known about insurance fraud, and we do a lot of public policy work. So essentially, we are one of the crossroads of the insurance fraud community because we represent such a diversity of member organizations. So we're very credible. We're very pleased. We're very honored to play this crossroads role in unifying the fraud fight through the very diversity of our members and our very big mission. So that's me and that's us in a nutshell.
Thanks, Jim. So telemed is a word we've been hearing a lot since the COVID pandemic. So what is telemed and why are we just really starting to hear about it?
Well, telemed is also called telehealth, and putting it simply, it's the delivery of medicine via audio hookup, via video hookup, via many of these data delivery devices like Fitbit and other wearables. That's another form of telemed if you want to stretch the concept. And telemed is changing healthcare as we know it. And in doing so, it's also opening wide the doors to a lot of fraud. Telemed is a very positive thing. It's great for consumers. It's great for insurance companies. It's adding a lot of efficiencies to medical delivery. It's saving a lot of money. It's saving time. This is a net plus for consumers, for insurance companies, for America in general. But anytime you have a paradigm change of this magnitude, which is compacting 6 weeks of change into, I should say we're compacting 2 years of change into 6 weeks or less. Anytime you have this kind of change in paradigm and delivery of medicine, you are also going to have chaos. You're going to have a lot of confusion. And this is precisely the kind of confusion and chaos and opportunity that fraudsters are going to be using to open the doors, come out of the shadows, and descend on consumers and the insurance industry with bogus telemed claims. We're looking at a pandemic of claims as much as we're looking at a pandemic of viruses. And it's not only happening now, but it's here to stay. It'll be here long after COVID-19 has disappeared.
Tom, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, it really is a confluence of events that's brought telehealth technology into the forefront, and this acceleration, and as Jim said, characterizing it as chaos. This acceleration has created great uncertainty and chaos, and it's not just within the insurance industry as to how we handle reimbursement and what this new billing looks like. But when you look at the medical industry, one, they're hailing it as this great event that's occurred as a byproduct of COVID-19, and that the restrictions have been eased that had previously existed pre-COVID-19. And these are largely privacy concerns. But they're struggling with the challenge of how do you bill for this and what's reimbursable. So you look at, for example, CPT codes are going through mammoth overhauls that actually started pre-COVID-19. Those now are going to be applied to this new telehealth wave. So you've got the AMA on the one hand, looking at billing codes, universally used standardized billing codes, and overhauling them. Next year, 2021, is going to be a whole new environment. And then you also have CMS, which is, the largest payer, struggling with what is allowable and what is not allowable. And I think a lot of the insurance industry is turning to CMS and saying, we're going to take our cues from CMS. Well, just monitoring what CMS is doing, it's clear CMS is struggling with all of this. So this tsunami of telehealth technology, which was waiting in the wings to come, I mean, this had been around for quite a while, is now here, and we've got large groups that are involved with access to healthcare, providing the healthcare, billing for the healthcare, and reimbursing for the the cost of the healthcare, all struggling to figure out where are we, what should we be doing, and as Jim says, it basically is a fertile environment for people who want to exploit this for fraudulent and abusive reasons. And you're going to see a position taken by people who are accused that we were simply struggling to figure out how to do this. We're not fraudsters. We're in this big gray area, and just like you, we weren't sure. It's going to be a tough area for carriers, and what's interesting is if you monitor a lot of the articles that are coming out, many of these groups are looking at it as a revenue generator. And that whole revenue generation, that this is going to increase our profits, is an interesting proposition, because what they're doing is they're trying to attach a dollar value to the technology. I'll give you an example of how that can get really messed up. Years ago, we had a case where emergency rooms were charging a trauma activation fee. And trauma activation was technology. It was simply that when you had people coming into the ER who met a criteria, for example, auto accident over age 70, they would activate trauma. That meant a signal went out to a beeper that was sitting on the hip of a doctor who happened to be at his or her office somewhere within proximity to the emergency room. That beeper would go off, meaning you need to come to the ER to see these people. But what we were finding was they were activating trauma for a $25,000 fee, and then we were tracking the deactivation. Okay, so how soon after they activate it were they deactivating the trauma alert? The deactivation was happening within a matter of minutes, but the $25,000 charge was showing up on the bill.
That's crazy.
So these carriers are marching in saying, hey, what gives? This is an ordinary auto accident. It just so happens that the driver and his passenger were in their early 80s. They had very mild injuries, but we just got a bill for $38,000 out of the emergency room, $25,000 of which is trauma activation. That's where they were putting a price on the technology, which was crazy, $25,000 to send it to alert beepers. So what we did was we took a position and said, this is billing for services that weren't rendered. There was no professional service involved. This was simply technology, and it was deactivated, and the professional, meaning, the orthopedic surgeon who was, 2 minutes away in an office, did nothing. And they ultimately, we were about to file a lawsuit. Somebody beat us to the punch on it, but it was absent. They stopped doing it, and it was all these major trauma centers. But that's where you get this concept of technology coming in, somebody trying to put a price on it, and then getting the pushback, because really what you're looking at is, was this a professional service involved? So getting back to these articles, I think Jim and I shared an article yesterday where it was purely directed at how much profit can we make out of telehealth, which is fascinating because it really is the same health service that's being provided. It's just being provided through a different means. So instead of face-to-face, we now have technology providing it. And query how the infusion of the technology somehow in and of itself should increase the value of the service. I'm not quite connecting all of that. So
Well, I think by the same token, Tom, I think your points are very good ones. And especially the abuse of technology, the scams themselves are going to be the same as we know and love. There's going to be upcoding, there's going to be bundling scams, that you're going to be billing for phantom services. One of the differences is you will have people recruited in mass by large telemed rings, and they're going to have nodes in offices all around the world and calling people, seniors from boiler rooms in El Salvador and Estonia. They're going to be recruiting people and giving them bribes like free medical equipment or maybe even some cash. And they're going to say, okay, we want you to take a medical exam with this doctor who's going to prescribe free braces or free this or free that. And all you have to do is give me your Medicare number, your health insurance, and other identifiers. I will hook you up with a physician and you'll get all these great freebies, and it's going to be convenient. So what then happens is thousands and hundreds of people are going to be paraded into these small 5-minute cursory telephone or video exams by colluding doctors who are on the take. They're going to do 5-minute quickies, barely even ask them questions. Then they're going to prescribe outrageously priced back braces, power wheelchairs, and other kinds of equipments, or compound medicines for $20,000 a tube, all billed to the insurance company. Millions and millions of dollars are going to flow in from the cost of these kinds of schemes. And it's going to be so easy to recruit people into these. This is going to be one of the fraud models of the future, and it's going to be telemed based, and you're going to be seeing industrial levels of scams and dollars stolen as a result of this, all prepackaged by very industrial strength telemed firms that know how to bring all the parties together. This is a big look at the future.
It's absolutely, and it's interesting in the sense that, just as Jim says, the fraud models themselves, the behaviors that we have seen throughout the years, they almost remain a constant. Well, I always give some credit to these people for kind of being creative, evil geniuses and figuring out, interesting ways to.
I call them mad scientists myself, but that's just me.
In thinking of creative ways of defrauding, really it defaults back to stuff we have seen all along. And even the telemedicine scams that I think are going to flourish, we were seeing those against single payers like Medicare, TRICARE, and the like, where it's just as Jim describes. You've got marketers, and the power is in collecting patients. So if you are a marketer, whether you're a telemarketer with a call center in the Philippines, or you are an individual who solicits the referral of patients from plaintiff attorneys or applicants' attorneys, you are marketing basically the services of a telemedicine company that its goal ultimately is not to deliver healthcare services to patients. Its goal is not specifically to serve the needs of the applicant's attorney or the plaintiff's attorney. Its goal is basically to create a bill that can be submitted to a carrier for payment, whether it's expensive compounded drugs, whether it's durable medical equipment, whether it's an MRI facility, a diagnostic facility. And so what they do is they assemble all these people, The linchpin is telemedicine, because you're not going to get to that MRI or to that DME or to those compounded drugs unless there is a signature on a prescription by somebody who is licensed in that state. And so what they do is these telemedicine companies, which, when you look at them by themselves, which they should have very close scrutiny paid to them. They're basically medical clinics. They are medical facilities. But if you look at the ownership issues, I'm thinking of one that was recently indicted in Texas. The owner who was indicted is someone who has nothing to do with medicine. This is a layperson who basically set up a telemedicine company by enlisting what I consider to be the sad sack physicians or the economically challenged physicians, anybody who's trying to make some extra money by what would be called moonlighting. And they basically have them signing pre-populated, pre-scripted findings, not for any medical purpose that benefits a patient. These pre-scripted findings are arranged and they're put there so that if you look at a single slice, a single claim, they can say, this patient was examined by this doctor, and that they apparently have a doctor-patient relationship, and that this doctor determined that this person couldn't take commercially available drugs, that this person needed a specially compounded drug, which incidentally costs $36,000. I mean, that's the whole point of the exercise. Did that person need the drug? No, because this is a drug that comes off of a menu that is created by the pharmacy that's involved. And they're basically creating 6 different concoctions, which you just check the box for whether it's erectile dysfunction or it's some sort of metabolic booster or whatever they want to call it. So this has nothing to do with patient care. And it really doesn't even move the ball forward. Their goal is not, gee, I want to keep all these referring sources happy, although that's part of it. The goal is to get that $36,000 bill generated.
Tom, that's a really crucial point you just raised. The point is this: a lot of telemedicine is going to be voodoo medicine. It has nothing to do with the health and welfare of honest policyholders who have medical conditions, who are coming to providers for trusting that they're going to get honest and fair and accurate diagnosis.
Right.
These providers who are fraudulent, they're going to be billing more to maximize income, not to treat patients. So people are going to be, they're going to be prescribed compound medicines, not ones that they need, but ones that will generate the most income. People are going to get telemed sessions that, again, are designed to maximize the coding value and dollar reimbursements, not to cure the patient or treat or diagnose. So you're going to have lousy treatments, you're going to have lousy diagnosis, you're going to have cursory exams when patients with conditions need a much more in-depth analysis. And this is potentially very, very dangerous for people who have medical conditions who will not get the care that they need. Insurance companies need to understand that not only is their bottom line at risk, but their policyholders' health and well-being is risk. Insurance companies that care about their policyholders are going to double down on these schemes, especially because of the welfare of their policyholders has got to be paramount.
You're absolutely right, Jim. And I think what we've seen as a trend in insurance fraud cases is they've gone from purely economic crimes, where they're just stealing money from the insurance company, to a situation where people's health and well-being is put at risk for financial gain. And it happens with compounded drugs, because think about it, these are substances that have been concocted. These are compounds that have been concocted for the highest reimbursable rate, not because it serves anything for this patient. They're creams. These are ingestible capsules or pills that are manufactured that the unknowing patient gets in the mail and then proceeds to consume, thereby introducing these chemicals or whatever these agents are into their bodies. And they're not all benign agents. They've got a lot of stuff in there. It's highly reimbursable. That's fairly benign, but not all of it's benign. To give you a real extreme example, in the counterfeit spinal hardware cases, you had a machinist in Temecula creating phony implantable spinal fixation hardware used in fusion surgeries, right? It's a machine shop that the expert inspected and said, this isn't your dad's shop, and this might not even be your grandfather's shop. This thing is so antiquated. And creating substandard, defective hardware, which, for profit, a distributor then distributed to major hospital chains and paid kickbacks to doctors to designate. So the doctor who has the choice, now this is a doctor, Hippocratic oath and everything, who for a kickback is willing to expose the patient to an unreasonable risk of harm simply because he's getting, $5 or $10 or $20,000 per surgery from the distributor to use this junk. And so we see this trend now where the aggressive fraud schemes seem to, it's not only that whatever they're doing doesn't really benefit the patient, they're willing to expose the patient to a risk of harm or actually harm them for financial gain. So I think that, when you look at this in particularly telemedicine and particularly compounded drugs, it's one thing with DME. So you get a weekly shipment of knee braces or some other braces that you'll never wear. That's not necessarily going to harm the patient. That's harming the payer. You get your, every 2 weeks, your compounded cream you're supposed to rub onto a body. Give you an example of how bad it got. There was a case in Southern California, a pharmaceutical, it was basically a pay to prescribe scheme where they sent people out to doctors and said, hey, look, we've got an income builder here. You can make an extra $360,000 a year if you prescribe all these creams to your patients. And it was largely in the California workers' compensation system, which is a whole issue by itself. But what happened, and it's alleged in an indictment, is that one of the patients rubbed the cream on her shoulder. She had an infant who she was holding, who absorbed what would be a benign compound with adults into a child because it involves some sort of cough syrup. The child absorbed it through the skin and died. And this is what I mean, fraud schemes going from purely economic to a reckless disregard as to the health of the patient. These have nothing to do with health.
Yeah, Tom, I think the add-on point there is insurance companies and their policyholders across all lines are going to be affected. You're going to have auto insurance companies that are being besieged by stage crash rings. You're going to have medical providers and crash victims sort of also colluding on bogus injury treatments and diagnoses, soft tissues, whiplash, That's all going to be managed and often defrauded through audio and video telehealth sessions. You've got workers' comp insurance companies. You have fake injuries by individual workers, but also you have large medical rings that are really causing huge damage to a state compensation system and private insurance companies. I can just see rings setting up massive telemed operations. Then, of course, you're going to have health insurance companies, private health insurers, and that goes without saying. Telemed is just going to be exploding with scams against private health insurance. Not to mention, of course, scams that are already exploding against Medicare and Medicare in the telemed front. So you're seeing multiple lines of insurance companies and policyholders all being set up for telemed scams. This isn't just a limited, siloed thing. This is something that's going to flow through and wash through most of the insurance industry and all their policyholders. Insurance companies of all lines really need to be waking up and thinking about what they're up against.
So with all the restrictions being lifted in the past 6 weeks and making it easier for telemed, is this here to stay, do you think? And if it is, how is that going to affect fraud in the future?
Telemed is absolutely here to stay. It is no longer a niche treatment. It's no longer niche healthcare. This is becoming mainstream, and people are really going to like the efficiencies of simply going into their home office, firing up their computers, and having a diagnosis and a session with a cup of coffee rather than schlepping down to the office to a doctor's office for half a day out of their valuable time. Insurance companies will love the efficiency too. Everybody's going to like the efficiencies. And as Tom, you pointed out multiple times, I've learned a lot from you. A whole generation of 80 million millennials who are digital natives are going to love this kind of efficiency. They're the most efficient communicators imagining. They love texting instead of email. So why not love telemed sitting on your laptop or on your cell phone rather than having to go downtown? This is something that's here to stay. We all have to understand it's going to be a permanent part of healthcare. Therefore, it's going to be a permanent part of the fraud landscape as well.
And to follow up on that, Jim, as to whether it's here to stay, and getting back to this concept that it's a confluence of events, this is a bit of a perfect storm because the AMA was redoing a lot of the CPT codes even before COVID-19 hit. I am told that in the 2021 codes that the old requirement for telehealth was you had to have an initial face-to-face visit, and thereafter you could use telehealth for follow-up. I'm told by an expert that in 2021, initial visits, so in other words, you do not have to be an existing patient to use a telehealth portal. You can be a new patient using telehealth. Think about that for a minute, a new patient using telehealth. That means that the initial visit after, and let's take the widest swath of auto claims, your basic soft tissue injury case. Your initial visit with a doctor can be this relatively brief phone call with a physician who can then make a determination and do a diagnosis and prescribe treatment. So think about the entrepreneurial fraudster who wants to serve the needs of the soft tissue industry, so to speak, whether it's the lawyers or it's chiropractors or medical doctors, where it simply is we can have a quick phone call with a telemedicine doctor sitting in Bali or El Salvador or South Africa. And that person can then prescribe it. Think of the problems the carrier has. Just one, getting information. And if you ever got into litigation, how do you take all these depositions? Now we could do it this way. We could do it on Zoom. And so I think the ripple effect of all of this is going to be huge. And it gets to this whole point about geographical limits being, whereas I think you could say 20 years ago, soft tissue was local. Somebody got into a minimal impact accident, not a lot of damage, but they've got neck pain. They went to their local chiropractor. There was a certain amount of work. They went to Kaiser. They went to wherever their usual thing was, relatively limited. Now I can see with telemedicine, well, where's your doctor? Well, my doctor's licensed in California, but is in Romania, or is in, wherever, could be anywhere, Buenos Aires. And I did everything via telehealth. And then we find out, well, how long, we get charged for the highest amount of service, which is now a time interval. And how do I disprove that it wasn't the nanosecond thing? How do I disprove that it was by showing that it was literally a brief chat on a smartphone?
Well, there's a parallel issue there too, is if you're looking for proof, are the records being stored? How are they being stored? Are they being stored at all of these phone calls? How do you access them? Do you need to change your subpoena procedures? What are the search and seizure issues? We may find there's a whole new world opening up on how you access the records, stored records of a video call, of an audio call. This is a whole new world of complication for insurance companies and certainly their lawyers who are trying to, and investigators who need to find the evidence that can prove or disprove fraud.
We're going through it now in a case, just to give you an example, where we have alleged that a single prescriber, single physician prescribed $55 million in compounded drugs to 270 people over a 13-month period. Okay, that's what occurred. Unraveling what occurred actually has been a bit of a challenge. The physician has advanced Alzheimer's. We have learned he was working during his regular employment for a telemedicine company to the point where it was interfering with his work with his regular employer. He has no records of any of the alleged examinations or his prescriptions. Those don't exist. His conservator has said there are no medical records. Those records are held by some other company, presumably the telemedicine company, that's a lay-owned telemedicine company. So now we have the medical records that supposedly support a doctor-patient relationship that instantly arose with 270 people, and as quickly as they cut it off, it stopped. And those people no longer required these meds or anything. We are having a hell of a time getting to the bottom of this because not only are there telemedicine companies, but they are layered. They're not readily available. There's buffers in between with other companies involved. There are multiple telemedicine companies involved, although a single marketer is directing the whole show. There's a single pharmacy involved, and we're getting to the bottom of that. But this shows you and they're all over the place. They're not local. So it's going to be like I say, the ripple effect goes out everywhere. Redefining how we look at these things, redefining how records are kept. A California physician should be keeping his or her own records of whatever medical treatment they purportedly provided to California residents. That seems to have gone by the wayside. with this, and the telemedicine company has complete control. So, it is a formidable challenge, not only to educate, identify, but once you've identified it, to get the anecdotal evidence that relates to it.
Well, similarly, insurance companies need to understand how the codes can be abused and manipulated for profit.
Yeah.
The codes are the gateway to telemed insurance fraud. Skilled fraudsters are already breaking down the codes and figuring out how they can use and misuse them for huge dollar profits at insurance company expense. The question is, are insurance companies well-versed on the new codes? Do they know what codes are coming down the road? Do they understand how the codes apply across all the treatment modalities, whether it's physical therapy, MRI, radiology, chiropractic? Do their staff understand this? Do their claims people understand this? Are they hiring coding firms that already are far ahead and well preparing for the oncoming surge of coding abuse? This cannot be underestimated, nor can the urgency of understanding how to manipulate these gateway codes to fraud. You have to start preparing now and be able to go head to head with the bills that are going to be coming in with all kinds of exotic and manipulated and abused codes attached to them for large dollars of fraud.
So that brings me to my next question. Are insurance companies ready for this?
I think I can give the simple answer, no. And I'll tell you why. This is a because of the chaos that has been created by all of this. Getting some sort of uniform standard for concepts such as whether this was an appropriate or inappropriate use of a code, whether it's this constitutes upcoding, whether upcoding really even exists, whether this is reasonable. And we get back to concepts that have been around since the beginning of time. Was this necessary? Was it reasonable? And again, if the actual billing people, the people that are creating the codes, are having trouble figuring out how to attach a code to the telehealth technology, the delivery method, and the payers are having difficulty figuring out what the reimbursement is for this, and there's no uniform standard, this makes it, I would say at this point, next to impossible for carriers to have any certainty when taking a position vis-a-vis the delivery of services via telehealth, because the standards are not going to be set for some time now. And so when we're in this gray fog where no one's quite sure which direction to go, think about the opportunities then that abound for people who are going to push the envelope. And you can have legitimate businesses and legitimate delivery of medical services pushing the envelope. Then superimpose on top of that this layer of fraudulent activity where they're saying basically to the carriers, okay, now you separate the wheat from the chaff. You figure out what's real and what isn't real, because we all look the same. So, and they will, and the way they're going to design these is so that it all looks the same and it all looks legitimate. And again, I'm a huge fan of claim analytics. I think that analytics, just simple billing analytics, are of utmost importance. If you really want to reverse engineer what a clinic's doing, what a healthcare provider is doing, what a hospital's doing as a regular course, you need a sufficient volume of claims. And then you run the analytics on the clinical part of it. Are we seeing cookie cutter treatment? Are we seeing identical diagnoses? Are we seeing manufactured findings sufficient to justify whatever expensive ancillary cost was incurred? And that's where you start getting into this preordained, and I think about back in the old days when we were going after personal mill operations, where you'd have a single chiropractor or a single doctor who seemed to have one speed, one size fits all, and templated reports. And I think Jim and I were joking around how some of these templated reports in the old days had the same typos on them and stuff like that. You're seeing that basically occurring now on a much larger scale. So analytics, if companies don't have an analytics department, they have to go find outside experts to take all of this data that they should be capturing. Now, clinical analytics, they may not be capturing, but think about it. Mill type operations, you tend to get templated reports, you tend to get templated treatment records where they have basically check the box, fill in the blank, and there's not a lot of room for individualism. These are basically cookie cutter type things. They need to look at the clinical analytics in addition to that to figure out what's going on. Because if you're looking at this, is telemedicine fraudulent? The answer is no, not in and of itself. Is it a flag? Is it something that should put you on alert? Well, yeah, it depends on the circumstances. Because, for example, well-respected great places, Stanford, Mayo Clinic, UCSF, you name it, they've all said, this is a godsend. This is fantastic. We can see patients remotely. We're going to use telehealth technology, and they're going to use it appropriately. It helps medicine. It helps them in delivering medical services. But, the real issue here is separating the wheat from the chaff. Where are those operations? Where are those rings? Where are those telemedicine companies that are not serving patient populations, could care less about patient health, safety, well-being, but they're rather saying, okay, if I get a doctor to rubber stamp this thing, then I've got a deal, and it's all greased by kickbacks. Everybody gets a piece of the action. I've got to deal with this pharmacy here where they will fill these prescriptions for these 6, compounded drugs, each at anywhere between $18,000 and $36,000 a piece. And all I need is that doctor, i.e. the telemedicine company. This is where the analytics can start saying, okay, we're seeing Dr. X, and you do the link analysis, and we're seeing Dr. X. We're seeing the same exact diagnosis coming out of Dr. X for a patient population whose demographic just ranges from a 2.5-year-old to a 70-year-old, healthy, unhealthy, you name it, male, female. It's a wide, diverse demographic, yet they've all got the same findings and the same treatment and the same stuff coming in. And this is how you uncover these operations, and you separate the legitimate stuff. Now, there's still going to be utilization, and there's still going to be, hey, we don't pay for these certain things, even though you're Mayo Clinic and you're your UCSF or whatever. And we realize you're pushing the envelope on the billing, but this is something that's not reimbursable from us.
Well, I think by the same token,
Yeah.
Tom, amplifying what you're saying and John's question, anytime you have 2 years of change being compacted into 6 weeks, as Tom said, you are going to have chaos and confusion. Insurance companies are only beginning to fully grasp the implications. The scammers are operating now. Insurance companies need to raise their defenses. You need to start thinking about enterprise-wide training throughout all the units within the company, not only about what telemed is, but also how it can be abused, misused, and defrauded. As Tom says, insurance companies need to have analytics that can accurately capture anomalies. even though they don't have a large database of telemed claims to draw from. They need to start figuring out how they can understand what are the telemed fraud indicators. They need robust sets of telemed fraud indicators in place now. And are you tweaking, updating, and is your machine learning adapting to analytics as the claims keep coming in, so that you're continuing to harden your system against the large incoming volumes of claims? I think insurance companies would be well advised to, once they understand what they're up against, to start stress testing their system by pushing deliberately positioned bogus telemed claims through the claim system to see if the insurance company is catching them accurately or not. This will be able to start showing weaknesses in the system. It'll show where the insurer is strengthened. It will be a very constructive exercise that shows insurance companies what they need to do next to continue to harden themselves against the oncoming claims.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point, Jim, because I think these, just like the virus morphs, these schemes morph, and I think that it is a constant process. And I think this idea, this concept that you stress test it, is a fantastic idea. It's almost like running bugs through a system as a quality assurance person, just to see if the bugs are picked up. And so, yeah, I think the challenge is formidable. I do think that one thing that has to be done, and it's been on the wane of late, which is heightened communication among payers, because keep in mind, they're all having common experiences. These schemes, it's the exception where they vary the scheme depending on the payer. That's the more sophisticated, where they'll fine tune a scheme depending on tolerance to payment. Most of them are running the same scheme, regardless of who the payer might be. And I always find it frustrating, and I think the beauty of coalition, and I think like the AFA and of podcasts like this, is that people are actually talking about what's happening, what they're experiencing, what they're seeing. And there's a wealth of talent in the fraud and anti-fraud industry. People who are brilliant when it comes to fighting these things. And I think it's really, this requires, I think, a concerted effort to start determining what level of education do we have to provide? What are the methods by which we can confront this menace now that is descended upon us? And I think it would be of immense value. I'm a true believer in, whether it's coalition, IASIU, AFA, you name the organization, the more people get together and talk about these, whether it's via Zoom or whether it's in person eventually, it's of immense value. And it's critical right now, because I think this is probably the biggest threat that has come down in ages. I can't remember one as big as this, simply because of the wholesale change, this, what we're calling the paradigm shift, where the model that we once, knew and experienced and you could recite chapter and verse is antiquated. And it's the old model. The new model hasn't even been fully realized. We don't know quite what it is. So I do think that education and sharing information. One thing I always stress, and I taught ethics classes for fraud on this, is there are information sharing statutes in most states. California's got one, 791.13. It allows insurance companies to talk to each other about fraud issues, and it is grossly underutilized. It has protections that are built in. You have to do it the right way. It's easy to do it the right way, and carriers should be doing it.
So go ahead, Jim. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I think also insurance companies need to vet and re-vet their business partners, the investigative firms, the data firms, and other business partners they deal with that support the anti-fraud and the claims functions. Are they up to speed? Are they in sync with the new realities? Do they understand telemedicine? Do you both have a unified, organized plan to jointly attack telemed? Both support the positive aspects of the claims experience, but also attack the scams that are going to be coming through. You can't just take the long time relationship between you and your vendor partners for granted anymore. With reality changing and you being forced to change, your vendor business partners need to change, and it has to be in lockstep and very carefully planned together, so that you both have the same understanding of telemed. You both understand the same understanding how to manage telemedicine in a positive claims and billing experience, but also jointly know the scams, know how to detect them, know how to prevent them.
Yeah,
Sorry, Tom. I just wanted to kind of bring this into the conversation. What can we learn from the 2008 financial crisis and compare to the wave of fraud we're going to expect in 2020 and 2021? What can we learn to help strategically plan for the future?
You know, that's a tough question, John, because I find this to be so unique. So you look at a postmortem after the financial crisis, and you say, what are the takeaways from there vis-a-vis what's going on now? And, you know, I look at this situation as being rather unique and a confluence of a number of events, one of which is there was a push for telemedicine before COVID-19, and the laws had been evolving to incorporate more telehealth technology into medicine and into healthcare delivery. You had basically telehealth technology companies, you know, everything from Apple to Fitbit to practice software that had that have telehealth modules and things, literally massed on the border, okay, waiting for the invasion. And, you know, the invasion was not imminent in January of this year. By mid-March, it was here. And I think the circumstances are so unique, it's hard to have a takeaway from 2008 other than what we're seeing and going to see are going to be well-known scams applied to new technology. And so in an article I wrote, and I've used it before, is John Kenneth Galbraith, who was John F. Kennedy's economic advisor and a Harvard professor, wrote a book, and he wrote about fraud, and he said, you know, basically the schemes are all the same. The methods of capitalism improve. And he's basically saying the schemes are the schemes. They're all known. It's just the technology now that's changing. So what I think the challenge is in this, I think relatively, you know, just like it's a novel virus, this is a novel insurance fraud pandemic where we have to think creatively as to how the schemes that we're all familiar with, for the most part, are going to be applied to this new technology. And this is where I think, you know, brainstorming and think tanks and people sitting around saying, you know, it's funny, people say, well, how would you know to ask that question? And I always tell them, you have to project yourself into what a criminal would do and what the realistic options are and the methods available, and then say, okay, well, this would be the easiest, best choice. And they tend to take the easiest route. I think we have to project ourselves into what the thinking is of the bad guys, and in effect say, okay, there's this new technology. How do we take what we've been doing and now apply it to that to maximize illicit gain? And so that I think is really the takeaway here. I think it's tough to compare this to anything. It's such a wholesale change, and literally, I mean, getting back to your question, is the insurance industry ready? The answer is no, because they didn't see it coming. Before this all basically hit, you knew it was out there and there was going to be some change, but not this instant, we're changing all the rules on you. And that's what's happening. They have to think about bad faith repercussions. I heard anecdotally that somebody within an SIU said, well, we're not paying any telemedicine claims. All I can say is good luck with that, because telemedicine is medicine today. And that's like saying we're not paying any of our claims.
Well, another reason telemedicine is here to stay, frankly, is that it's going to be a marketing and branding benefit for insurance companies. There's going to be so much public demand for telemedicine once we get used to the amazing efficiencies that it offers, that an insurance company that does not offer a robust, well-organized telemed operation for the benefit of its policyholders is going to find itself behind the curve competitively. Policyholders are going to start choosing insurance companies that offer the best telemed experience as one of the reasons for signing up with that insurance company. If you're behind the curve and still doing medicine the old-fashioned way, requiring people to come into offices and get in-person diagnostics and exams and treatments, you're going to lose out in the marketplace, in the new, evolving, emerging marketplace of medicine and insurance, health insurance today. You've got to get with the program if you want to capture the minds and hearts and dollars of policyholders.
Yeah, I'm actually already seeing commercials for telemed, like just pushing it. And it's interesting, just in the last few weeks, they've been popping up, and that's a big marketing ploy.
They're going to be branding, insurance companies that are smart are going to be branding themselves very assertively as the telemed company that you can do business with, that cares so much about you, that it's going to offer this amazing efficiency. It's going to be, you're going to be seeing commercials, you're going to be seeing print ads, they're going to be popping up they're going to be popping up in geofencing ads on Facebook. Telemed as a marketing and branding benefit to compete for policyholder use is going to be huge in the marketing and advertising budgets of insurance companies of the future.
So any closing remarks, anything you guys want to touch on that maybe we didn't before we wrap this up?
I think we covered a lot of ground. I think there's a lot of strategic planning that has to be done by carriers. And I think first and foremost, the word has to get out that this has arrived. I think that it is a bit of an eye-opener when people hear about the extent to which rules have been relaxed or changed or eliminated, and that new rules are coming into place, which we're not quite sure what they are at this point. And I mean, I think having designated groups to monitor the progress, to report, to fully understand so that, from top to bottom, people are educated on this is imperative, because unless you really know the lay of the land, you're just operating in the dark. And you think about claims decisions that need to be made, need to be based upon something that can explain the claims decision. And so I think it is imperative, and as Jim says, you can't stress the urgency enough that carriers try to at least keep pace with things, let alone get ahead of things. And I think that is the challenge, and it's going to be for the balance of 2020 and going into 2021.
I'll simply add that telemedicine is here to stay. It's not simply the latest bright, shiny object that's going to be here and then disappear. Telemed is fundamentally remaking healthcare as we know it today. Insurance companies need to understand what it is, how it works, and how it can be defrauded. You need to do it now, you need to do it with urgency, and you need to do it not only for your own bottom line, but you need to do it to protect your policyholders who are depending on you to deliver quality health care and do it fraud-free. Insurance companies that make the leap, that are agile enough to prepare and get on top of telemedicine are going to be the ones that succeed and profit and prosper in the future. Those that miss the boat, those that are the cabooses instead of the engines, they're going to find they're going to be losing business, and they're going to be finding a tremendous amount of drainage in their bottom lines, both through lost policyholders, but also through fraud losses. Now's the time to prepare. You either prepare now or you pay later.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing I've taken away from today is, our industry, we need to come together on all sides and come up with ways to combat this, else it could get out of hand quickly.
Absolutely.
So, well, I appreciate you guys joining me today. It would be real interesting, and maybe in a couple months from now, if we got back together and kind of analyze, what changes have been made. Our insurance companies, are they being successful in trying to combat this, and what new fraud schemes have popped up with the telemed now really starting to roll?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, an update, because this is a constantly shifting environment. The rug is being pulled out from under us every time you turn around and you think you know what you've got. The moment you think you understand the environment, the rug is pulled out and you have to start relearning all over again. So a follow-up in 2 months might reveal all sorts of new information.
I think it's a great idea. This is changing day to day. So.
Yeah, so instead of thanking you guys for, this episode, we'll just kind of put like a to be continued, as we'll continue and follow up with you guys in, 2 months and see where the industry and the landscape's kind of going.
That sounds like a deal.
All right. Sounds good. So thanks again. And, I think myself and the listeners have learned a lot from you guys, and you guys have a great day, and let's talk soon.
Great. Thanks. Will do.
Thanks, John.